say right at the beginning that I am very far from being an expert on biogas, or indeed on edie. In fact, what struck me about the worst thing about anaerobic digestion was the name. I think it's the name which probably puts everyone off. But I'm here really to talk about the broader setting in which in the UK we might think about biogas. So let's start by looking at our energy priorities. And whatever side of the Parliament you sit on, security of supply, environmental security, means dealing with aspects of climate change and so on, and cost are the key elements. And so the question is, how do what we do to go about this? And the answers are pretty clear. They've been enunciated enough times. We've got to improve efficiency, we've got to avoid waste, and we've got to reduce our use of fossil fuels and change to low carbon alternatives. And the question, if you like, for today is to what extent can biogas from anaerobic digestion really help with these objectives? And I hope that you will see that by the time I finish speaking, actually biogas ticks all of those boxes. Now, if we look at what we're doing at the moment with fossil fuels, at least in 2007, which is the latest year I could find information for, we still use an awful lot of oil. We're using less coal than we did a few years back, but gas accounts for 40% of our energy, and that of that gas, roughly 2/3 comes from the North Sea, and roughly 1/3 is imported. And that 1/3 is significant in the context of which I shall speak later. Well, gas in general is a very flexible fuel. It's marvellous stuff. You can use it to generate electricity pretty cleanly. You can use it in combined heat and power. You can use it as a transport fuel. And in fact, even mineral gas, so-called natural gas, has the lowest carbon per unit energy produced of any of the fossil fuels. But the big thing is, biogas is better still. And the reason, of course, that it's better still is that it has a very small carbon footprint. Probably not zero, but pretty small. And I apologize for this slide, but it's probably just worth reminding people of the basics of the science. If we have some trees here which we cut down and take to this little power station, which we operate on wood pellets from those trees are sucking in CO2 from the atmosphere. During the combustion process in the power station, the CO2 goes back, and even though the CO2 going into the atmosphere, it is effectively recycled CO2 that has been sucked in that way. In contrast, if we look at fossil CO2, CO2 that has perhaps been stored in oil reservoirs here, but it could be coal, it could be gas that we were talking about. But the point about this CO2 is that it's been taken out of the Earth's natural circulation tens, and in some cases hundreds of millions of years ago, and simply locked into the interior of the Earth. And that was the Earth's natural cycle. What we are doing when we use it is interrupting that natural cycle, and we are taking it out of the ground, and by burning it in vehicles, we are putting what was stored or sequestered CO2 and adding it to the atmosphere. So this means that every fossil fuel unit that we use simply transfers CO2 from the interior of the Earth to the atmosphere, which, for good scientific reasons, we think is pretty bad news, because it looks as if it is already producing climate change with some serious consequences. And it's worth just bearing in mind that if you use a vehicle, for example, to pick up a nice green fuel, but you then to take it to the factory, you in fact are adding to the carbon footprint of that green fuel. So the important thing is to recognise that the carbon footprint of a green fuel, whether it's biogas, whether it's wood or anything else, really is affected by the amount of fossil fuels used in their production and transport. So you've got to look at that whole life, if you like, cradle to grave use of fossil carbon. Now, plants and animals are the, if you like, at the root of biogas. And plants uniquely take CO2 and water from their environment, and they take energy from the sun, really, which is the main energy source for the earth, and they build new complex chemicals, polymers, by photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a marvellous process and one that we can't really reproduce. A lot of people putting lots of effort to doing photosynthesis in the lab, doing, if you like, artificial photosynthesis, but no one's achieved it yet. And the energy which came from the sun is stored in the complex organic molecules which those plants make. And they can be sugars, they can be starches, they can be oils, they can be cellulose, lignin, all of the materials that we are familiar with in plants. Now that energy which is stored is released when the molecules are oxidized, which means that they can be digested in anaerobic digestion or indeed burnt. And this is why they are a very valuable use of a store of energy for us. Now, the thing about us and other animals is that we're unable to use the sun's energy directly, and we can only access it through eating plants, or even more indirectly by eating animals. And animals use plant material pretty inefficiently, and they excrete what they can't process. And this means that we have two energy-rich streams that can yield biogas or methane. And you can use these terms effectively interchangeably. We've got plant wastes that come directly from plants, and we have animal wastes that come from animals. And these are both major inputs, as you're aware, for anaerobic digestion processes. We actually do need to change our outlook, and I think we're going to be coming back to this topic a number of times later today. We've just emerged from a century in which we were unbelievably profligate in the way that we use the Earth's natural resources. We tended to grow crops or animals for a single purpose, and we tended to throw away what we didn't use, whether it was straw from corn, a whole range of things. And as we go into this century, with a world population which continues to expand and which needs to meet its energy needs and its food needs from a limited resource, we've actually got to think of an integrated production of food, materials and energy. There shouldn't be any wastes. We can actually find a use for everything for some purpose or other. And bio-wastes, beautifully decomposing in an airless environment, produce a biogas that is mostly methane. So extracting energy from the residue streams that we've talked about, its first thing is to remember that energy can be recovered however many times the original plant material or the original animal material has been used. If you like, leather can come from animals, can be used in shoes, can be used in other things. All of that original energy is still there if we want to put it through a process to recover it. And we've got a number of ways of getting energy from these bioresources. And there are thermal processes, incineration, pyrolysis and gasification. And they are, as we go down this list, they have increased efficiency. Gasification is a very efficient process, but the risk and the complexity increases as you go down that list. On the other hand, if you look at fermentation and digestion, anaerobic digestion is well established, and there is a steady and I think significant improvement in the handling, and generally speaking, the processes can be managed relatively easily. But it is important to remember that the quality, the energy content of what you get out is indeed related to the energy content of what you put in. Just as if you, this is true in everyday life. Eating a stick of celery is very different from eating a Mars bar. One has an awful lot of calories in, and it quite serves one purpose, and eating a stick of celery is quite different. I don't like celery, but that's beside the point. Now, we are really quite late in this country, in some respects, coming to anaerobic digester. Apparently, the earliest anaerobic digester was built in 1859 in Bombay, but I didn't know this, so I looked it up. In 1895, a so-called sewer gas destructor lamp was used in Exeter. So it was a gas lamp fed by methane from the sewers. And in the 19th century, and indeed probably earlier, biogas was from anaerobic digestion was used in Canada. And in the 70s, there was a major drive, both in Canada and in India, to spread the use of anaerobic digestion. And in China, they ran week-long courses for farmers to help them to do this. And it was partly as an energy resource, partly to destroy the pathogens in the waste, to effectively make them safe, and later on, when more attention was given this, indeed to avoid methane in emissions. So where are we in the UK? Well, the story is not really a pretty one. This chart shows you the waste management choices in Europe, as was published in 2006. And you have countries listed down here, and I don't know whether that's legible from the back, but that is Greece at the top and the UK second. What you will be able to see is the length of these red bars. The red bars reflect the proportion of waste that is landfilled, the black, the amount that's incinerated, the blue that is composted, and this white is off-white is recycled. And you can see that the UK is right up there and putting almost everything to landfill, with a little bit of incineration and then into compost. And which is bizarre, given that we live on islands here, which are allegedly short of space. The last thing you want to do is dig holes in the ground and then try and fill them up. But we have had almost nothing in the way of a coordinated, thoughtful, really approach in the UK for the management of waste. And this is certainly going to come up later today. And I think government, as Lorenzo was saying, are going to need to take another look at actually how we manage waste in this country. But you can look at our competitor countries, look at France. They are only burying something like 35% or 40% of their municipal waste. Sweden, perhaps 20%. Denmark, as little as 5%. We are well on a limb here, and it simply reflects the lack of a sensible and coherent policy. Most of the biogas in this country today, in fact, comes from landfill sites, where people have largely put polythene over landfill and collected what biogas came off, not in any very efficient. Biogas is not really generated in any efficient way, but it's actually a sensible thing to do. But hopefully, if this organisation makes the case for AD very strongly, we're going to move on beyond that. But the present levels of AD in this country are modest but growing. So what's the UK resource? We have a lot of animals and really a lot of trees. 10 million cattle, 4.5 million pigs, 166 million poultry, and a lot of forestry waste. And these are mostly owned and managed by private individuals or private companies. And here there is a real prospect, if we get the information, of these people recognizing the benefits that they can get from this. But we also have urban waste streams, and of these, typically 50% is bio-waste. And we have a number of significant industrial organic waste streams. And most of these are sort of town and county council managed. And then we have wastewater and sewage sludge, a lot of that. And this is from water companies. And the big problem is that energy generation is outside the experience and often the legitimate objectives of some of these organizations. Water companies, and I've just come back from a week in Singapore out of a water conference, most water companies still do not regard energy generation as a significant priority. If you can generate enough energy, probably to cut the cost of the water purification, that's fine. But actually thinking of wastewater as an energy resource worth exploiting in its own right, and question of how you optimize within this system is a relatively new thought. And this is one of the things we have to change. Well, how much biogas you get, as I talked about earlier, really depends on the nature of the waste, on the technology used, and the digestion period. And there's a lot of variation in that. And reliable numbers for the resources in this country are not really available. But, in Denmark there is a very clear case that a cubic meter of domestic waste, organic material, well, they have been able regularly to produce well over 100 cubic meters of gas from that. So what are the challenges and what are the opportunities? Clearly, the first and I think overwhelming challenge and urgency is general education. We have to make people aware of the problem and aware of the possibilities. And traditional public waste managers have little incentive for energy optimization. And here it's a matter of government taking a stand and actually talking to the various public utilities that are involved. Then there are questions of biogas connection and distribution. And this is a complicated one. You can waste a lot of energy in this, and it just has to be managed carefully. On the opportunity side, we've got the high cost of fossil methane, of so-called natural gas, which actually is going to make biogas really quite attractive. And this is particularly so because of the feed-in tariffs, the FITs, which government is now developing. And coming at this relatively late is a bit of an embarrassment in one sense, but it's an advantage in another, because we can learn from what other people have done and what hasn't worked here and there. And for example, quite a number of anaerobic digestion plants, some of the gas is actually used to maintain the temperature of the digestion chambers. Now that may not be a very smart thing in 2010, because we now have highly efficient solar tubes which can actually get you the right sort of temperatures that you really want, the 50 degrees, 40 degrees for the digestion process, and you're probably much better selling that gas directly or using it to generate electricity and putting it into the grid. So there are a range of interesting optimizations here which need exploring. But the point I would make is it's not a one-size-fits-all activity. Situation varies from place to place, from farm to farm, from municipality to municipality. But the other good thing is that, interestingly, if you look at what's been going on abroad, quite a number of UK companies have actually been selling their expertise overseas, and clearly very successfully. So it's not as if we're ignorant in this, it is just that the home market has never been developed. So what are my conclusions? Well, very clearly, bio-wastes are a really valuable resource, and anaerobic digestion is a truly efficient way of exploiting them, and it works. The beauty of it is that it works on a small scale. It will work on a farm with 50 cows, or it can work on the scale of a large city with a massive volume of sewage sludge. Practical experience is there in developing countries, and we should not be too proud to take advantage of it. We should actually see what's been done in India and China and other places where this is, because, you know, they say the difference between a wise man and a fool is that a fool learns by his own mistakes and a wise man learns by the mistakes of others. So we should do that too. As I said a moment ago, there are going to be different approaches in different sectors. we have a very significant, I didn't use huge, Rupert, or I didn't use massive, I said significant, untapped source of indigenous green energy. And displacing natural gas with biogas can significantly reduce UK greenhouse emissions. Now you say, what is significantly here? There was one estimate which I could not verify, but that a plausible use of biogas resources in this country could actually meet about a third of our natural gas needs. In other words, it could effectively replace the imported gas, which I showed you on the early slide. Now, that's not a figure that I would die for. It is an estimate made by people that I respect, but I can't verify it. But finally, conferences like this are absolutely vital to make people aware of the potential of anaerobic digestion. Thank you very much.